Hello everyone, my name is Eric Rutens and I am live streaming today for Matrixgames and Slytherin, showing you Brother Against Brother, the drawing of the sword. I hope you enjoyed the little promo video for Forge of Freedom, which was a previous release from the Western Civilization software studio covering the Civil War. This is their new 2015 release, which is of a different scale. This covers tactical battles in the Civil War during the first year. That's hence the name, The Drawing of the Sword. This is the time period where both sides had just gotten armies together and were starting to figure out what the war would really be like, and what the tactics and weaponry and the terrain and combinations of those, what those would really lead, how the rest of the war would evolve. And what we're looking at today is we're going to look at the starter scenario for Brother Against Brother. And this involves the Battle of Williamsburg. Now, Brother Against Brother ships with about 25 scenarios covering several major battles, some of which have not been covered in great detail before, and all of which we feel are covered at a greater level of historical accuracy than ever before in Brother Against Brother. I've worked together with Gil and Eric and the Western Civ team on this game as the producer, and I'm happy to give you a preview of it today. So let's start here. You can see on this view here, this is sort of the main game interface, that we're looking at part of the battle map. And this battle map, as you can see on the right hand side, there's a mini map that sort of shows you a highlighted white area. That is the area that we're looking at. So you can see the whole battle map for Williamsburg is actually quite huge. And this isn't even the biggest map in the game. And what we've done is we've actually gone, specifically Gil from the Western Civ team, has gone and taken a look at these battlefields firsthand, worked together with the historians at the battlefields, and gone back to primary sources, because in many cases there weren't readily available great maps that showed the historical details of these battles as they happened, and put together the battle maps and the orders of battle, and basically all the details, even down in some cases to company level officers for the units involved. Let's see, so I've got a request to turn the rain off. The rain is too loud. Let me see if I can do that here. Well, I can turn the voices off. I can turn the weather off. Let's see if that helps. Hopefully that'll help. As you can tell, though, the rain, this battle did happen in the rain, this particular battle. And it only shows up on the sides, and unfortunately that seems to have not helped, so we're still going to get a little rain sound from time to time. I guess we're just going to have to live with that. Hopefully it won't happen too often. So, the Battle of Williamsburg. If you all haven't taken a look, if you look at our site, Matrixgames.com, there is right now a big image of the battle map of Williamsburg, and it also has the battle history and the order of battle that you all might want to take a look at and be able to read along with. Maybe one of our folks can put a link to that in the chat. But the basic idea here is that the Union is marching inland from a peninsula. They're basically heading towards Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy. And this peninsula that they're marching down between two rivers, the York and the James River, has a lot of difficult terrain and good defensive positions, and some of these were set up in advance by the Confederacy. And so this particular attack by McClellan's Army of the Potomac is coming on an area of the map that has Fort Magruder. And I'm going to scroll down here so you can see Fort Magruder down here. Now, Fort Magruder is not going to be a major part of this particular starter tutorial scenario, but in the main Battle of Williamsburg scenario, boy, is there a lot of action around Fort Magruder. What we're covering here is Winfield S. Hancock's flank march. And Winfield Hancock, you may have heard of him from the Battle of Gettysburg. This was one of his first actions of the war. And what you see happened here is up here at this Cub Creek area, the Confederates had left this bridge and this redoubt here undefended. And while the main Union force was fighting here down by Fort Magruder, the division under General Smith, which included Hancock's brigade, marched north and around the Confederate flank, and then came in on the flank of Fort Magruder, and the Confederates had to react to this. Now, when you first load Brother Against Brother, this is the tutorial scenario that we intend you to start with, and you'll see all these yellow question marks on the battlefield. You might wonder what those are about. Well, if you click on them, you'll get a message that'll tell you something about the game, and in this tutorial scenario we use these question marks liberally to help teach you the game and different elements of the map. In the actual battles, these question marks outside the tutorial are reserved for points of historical interest, where special events relating to the battle happen, so that as you fight the battle you can look at these question marks to get an idea of what happened and where it happened if you're comparing yourself to the historical events. Let me go quickly over the interface, and then we'll actually get started with the action. What you'll see on the top here is that we have a strength summary. That tells us how many infantry, cavalry, and guns are on each side in this scenario, the top being the Union, the bottom being the Confederacy. In the middle, we have the time, the date and time of the battle, and we can see this particular battle starts at 3 p.m. on May 5th, and it ends at 7 p.m. And we can see that our morale is 3.35, and our force will break at 1.25. That's an important mechanic that I'll cover in a sec. And then finally, you'll see at the top here that we have a score of 3 against 1 right now. The U.S. controls 3 of 4 victory hexes. The Confederates control 1 of 3. There have been no casualties so far, so the score is just 3-1. Casualties act as a multiplier on the victory points once the battle actually begins. We can also look on the left-hand side here where we have our unit roster. Our unit roster gives us a summary of all the units that are currently in the force that we're controlling. And right now, this is a pretty small scenario, so we have a pretty small force. But you'll notice, and we can expand on this to get some additional information on each of these units, you'll notice that you can see the strength of each of these units, what their current morale is, how many moves they have left, or what their level of supply is. And you can think of that as the number of bullets. So for example, 60 would be each man marched into the battle with 60 bullets in his knapsack. What you'll also notice is that it tells you, for each echelon, who the commander is, what the brigade order is for that brigade, and it also gives you a color coding. So we've got these magenta, sort of cyan and yellow lines on the left. And when you look here, I've got the markers on, the color markers on, so you see how we have these units with magenta around the border. Well, magenta is the color of the 2nd Division, so we know these are all, if they've got magenta around the outer border, these are all 2nd Division units. And the 1st Brigade is cyan, the 2nd Division's independent artillery and such are yellow, so we know that if it's got cyan in the middle, that's part of the 1st Brigade. The yellow in the middle here is part of the independent 2nd Division forces. Same applies to the Confederacy. If you prefer not to have those, you can also turn them off just like that, and then you can have the without the unit colors, but I prefer to have those on as a way of keeping track of my organization. Now you've got a similar pop-out panel on the left for reinforcements. In this case, there are no reinforcements in this battle, but if there were, that lists all of them for you, tells you when they're going to come in, where they're going to come in, and you can even click on them there, and it'll move the map to where those reinforcements will come in. Last part of the interface I want to cover, second to last actually, let's first look at the top right, and you'll see that as I'm mousing over things, you'll see the information there changes. That's sort of a quick at-a-glance view that tells you what the current weather is in this hex, what the terrain is under the mouse, and if there's a unit under the mouse, what the quick stats on that unit are. Now let's look at an actual unit, and we can look at the bottom left part then. And this is where some of the meat of the game is. First thing you'll notice is on the very bottom, you'll see the 6th Maine Infantry, and that is a regiment. And each regiment is part of a brigade, usually multiple regiments that make up a brigade. And you'll see that just above where it says 6th Maine Infantry, there's another small section popping up above that, over here, that says 1st Brigade Hancock. So we know that they belong to Hancock's 1st Brigade. And then above that, you'll see that that brigade also belongs to the 2nd Division, which is Smith's, out of Erasmus Keyes' Corps. Now, we don't have the Corps level of command in this particular scenario, but we go all the way up to the Corps and Army level of command when we're dealing with the main scenarios themselves. So let's start at the regiment. You can see again the number of men, and this number in parentheses gives you the breaking strength of the regiment, at which point its morale will start to break. You can see its morale here, at the starting morale and the current morale, its supply, its moves, the fact that it's ready to fight. They can also be unready to fight, or they can have fatigue. And then they have junior officers. Now, junior officers, those would be your captains and such. who are helping out at the company level. If you start losing junior officers, you're going to have a harder time getting your brigade to effectively make formation changes and such without becoming disordered. Every unit also has weaponry. So in this case, they're equipped 100% with smoothbore muskets. If we mouse over this, you can actually see some historical information on the smoothbore musket. And down here, you can see the statistics, 250/31/0, etc., that tell you how effective that weapon is at each range. In this game, each turn takes about 20 minutes, and it's a turn-based game, and each hex is about 75 yards. So you can see that this musket is really only effective out to about 150 yards. And it's really only effective at about 75 yards. If you really want to get the biggest bang for the buck, you really want to be right up close to the enemy unit. Whereas if we go to the 49th Pennsylvania here, they're equipped with Springfield rifles, and the Springfield rifle can do some effect out to 5 hexes here, or over 300 yards. Now, each unit can also have these other abilities. So in this case, the 6th Maine has the sustained volley ability. They take 25% fewer casualties when firing on enemy infantry. And it also tells you what their commander is, in this case Colonel Hiram Burnham, who is rated for initiative, tactics, command, and leadership. And each of these ratings play into how this regiment performs on the battlefield. The buttons to the right of that simply are your formation changes. So we could, right now this regiment is in line. We can tell it to send out skirmishers or pull them back. We can tell it to change into column. We can tell it whenever we want it to charge, never or some of the time, depending on the regiment's judgment, or whenever it can. And we can also split the regiment. If we need to cover more frontage, we can split the regiment so that we can cover more than one hex with it. There's also forced march and surrender and turn in the battle history of the regiment. So that pretty much covers the regiment area. Let's skip up to the brigade. Now at the brigade level, one of the really nice features about Brother Against Brother is that we really tried to get the functions of the different command levels of the Civil War on the battlefield correct. So the first level you have is the brigade level, and you'll see that Winfield Hancock here is a pretty darn outstanding brigade commander. He's great in initiative, excellent tactics in command, and excellent leadership. You'll see on the left-hand side here, it tells you that his brigade order right now is advanced, and that he has a 70% change order, 75% coordination, and can urge one unit. Well, all these things play a role. So Winfield Hancock, first off, if you've got multiple regiments from the same brigade next to each other and they're fighting, having a good brigade coordination can really help them to support each other and multiply their efforts in battle. In addition, it can also help Winfield Hancock pass on some of his excellent qualities in terms of tactics and initiative and such to help with their movement, to help with their combat capabilities. And he also helps them have a 70% chance to change orders successfully, which is important because what you'll see here is there are a lot of different brigade orders, and they each actually have a pretty big impact on what that brigade is expecting to do and how it performs. So we've got the march order here, which is the fastest way to move, but you can't get closer than 4 hex to enemy units, you can't charge, and you're really not going to be effective in terms of firing or combat. Your men are simply in a march column moving as fast as they can. The rally order is very useful when your regiments get damaged by combat, when their morale starts to break. Sometimes even an entire brigade can start to lose its morale. Then you want to pull them back, switch to rally orders, and try to reconstitute and reorganize them so they can go back into battle. Very useful in the larger, longer scenarios. We have the hold order, which is mainly oriented towards defense and holding a position. It makes them less likely to retreat. The withdraw order, when you're trying to pull back but not rout. The advance order, which is what we've used now, which is kind of a compromise between assaulting and marching. You're able to move up pretty close, you're getting a fair amount of movement, but you're still not quite at maximum effectiveness because you're spending a fair amount of time moving. And finally assault, which is really what we're going to end up spending a good part of the scenario in. That's your maximum firepower, fire combat order. And finally mass charge. If what you really want to do is sound the rebel yell and go in with bayonets, then that's mass charge is what you want. Now, he can also urge a unit. Now, urging a unit represents Hancock's ability to basically take a particular regiment and get it moving and buck up its morale and give it some positive modifiers by dint of his qualities and his presence. That's something that He may not get every turn, but a good commander like him may be able to every turn give a bit of a boost to one of the units in his command. Now the division level and the corps level and the army level are all different. So in this case, the division level, what we're looking at here is the commander, William Baldy Smith, who's fair on initiative, good on tactics, good on command, and fair on leadership. As a division commander, he's going to help with the movement of the brigades and regiments under him. And he's also going to be able to, he can't this turn, but he's going to have some chance of being able to declare sort of a focus for the division, pass down orders that will make it more likely that if you target a particular hex with this focus hex ability of the division commander, it'll make units more likely to fire at that hex, and it'll make it more likely that you might get bonus attacks or counterattacks and so on. Alright, so I think I've pretty well covered it. We'll cover some of these other buttons here a little bit later, so let's go ahead and get started. Our job here is we're going to try to push down as far as we can toward Fort Magruder. You can see this down here, this objective here that says USA only, has sort of a blue star. That's sort of our stretch goal. If we're incredibly successful, we'll get that far. But really what we are really hoping to do is just hold what we've got and maybe take these two readouts here and force the Confederates down in Fort Magruder to redeploy more forces towards us and think about what to do. Now I'm going to go ahead, figuring that speed is of the essence, I'm going to go ahead and just start moving towards these readouts. I'm not going to pause at this point to put out skirmishers. And I'm going to keep the 6th Maine and the 49th Pennsylvania near each other so that they can support each other if they're able to. And that'll again be influenced by the brigade commander's ability to influence their coordination. And we're going to go ahead and move the 5th Wisconsin down towards this other readout as well. Now when you're moving by default, these units will march, and if you're moving a long ways, you can actually speed that up by just clicking again, and the unit will jump to the end of its movement. If you're moving past what you can normally see, then the same thing will happen. But if you want to watch them march, and I'm sorry about that glitch there, this is the first time I'm live streaming from this computer, and it seemed to have a little issue there that I had to Alt-Tab to resolve. So what we've got back here is also some artillery. So we got 4 ordnance rifles, 1st battery of the 1st New York Artillery, and I'm going to move them towards this objective. And they've got their own brigade commander, Lieutenant Charles Cicero, who's in charge of that independent artillery unit. And I'm going to switch their orders to assault. And we're going to take the 1st battery of the New York Artillery here, which has 6 ordnance rifles, and we're going to move them down to cover this objective and face them that way. And we'll move Hancock down to where he can stay close to his men. Now, when I've got Hancock selected, you see this little button above where it's next where it says 1st Brigade. If I click that, it shows me his command radius. Now, he has a very good command radius. Generally, if a unit is within that command radius, it's going to be in command, especially for a good commander like Hancock. If a unit is out of that command radius, then it can be out of command, and out of command can come with a lot of penalties. You can take units that are independent units, like independent regiments, and attach them temporarily to another brigade to get into that brigade commander's radius if they've somehow become detached from their own brigade or other forces. And it's also a good idea within the different command echelons to take and keep those in range of each other as well. So if we take General Smith here and we look at his command radius, we can see that he's not really actually in range right now of Hancock. So we're going to go ahead and move him. And now he is in range of Hancock, so hopefully the two of them will start to coordinate. And I'm going to take the 33rd New York here, change them into column. So they successfully changed into column. When you see on these buttons a percentage chance, that percentage is basically the chance that you're going to complete that change in formation and still have some movement left. If you fail, you're still going to change formation, but you're not going to have any movement left after that formation change. It just took too long. And it seems like we're having some issues here with Twitch in my system, so I'm just gonna have to Alt-Tab from time to time to get Twitch to remember what it's showing. It's just hitching up a bit, being a little twitchy, I guess. So I apologize for that to everyone. If you see those odd views of my desktop from time to time, that's what's going on. Hopefully we'll have that resolved by the next time that I stream. It's not specific to this game. The game doesn't do that when I'm not streaming this through Twitch. Alright, and over here we've got 33rd New York Corning's Battalion, and we're going to start them moving because what I want them to do is I want them to cover this road here so that we don't get any Confederate units coming into our rear. So we're going to go ahead and jump them ahead to there. Let me also explain something while I'm looking at this, because you guys might be wondering what some of these other symbols on the map are. So I've got the 5th Wisconsin selected now, and you'll see that some of these hexes have sort of a white crosshair on them, and other hexes just have sort of a gray cross. So the white crosshair means that this is a hex they can see, and it's also within range of their weapons, of effective range of their weapons. The gray crosses mean that they can see there, but it's out of their weapon range. If we take, for example, this artillery unit, you'll see that they have a pretty decent range. What they can see, they can pretty much shoot at, whereas with the infantry, that's not the case. Alright, so I think we've completed our movement. Now, one of the things you'll see here also is that it keeps track by default of your movement lines as you move them. As you play at the higher difficulty levels, and there are a lot of different difficulty levels that you can choose to tailor the game to your liking, what you'll find is that there's also a rule that can result in units and brigades failing their activation. So you'll give them their orders, but for whatever reason, and there were many reasons why this happened historically in the Civil War, and it did happen fairly often that things just took longer than they should have for brigades to move out or divisions to move out. The end result is that if a brigade would fail its activation, then it's basically stuck on its previous orders, and you have to try again next turn. Now, when that happens, you're going to see red circles around them. That's not something that I've got turned on right now. By default, at the default levels, and for the tutorial scenario, you're not going to have to deal with that. But when you become a more advanced player, that's a feature you're probably going to want to have enabled. But that's why we also show the lines, not just so you know where you came from, but so, in effect, until you end a turn, in some cases you don't know if all those orders are really going to happen if you've got that turned on. So I'm going to go ahead now. I've got most of these units pretty close. I'm going to go ahead as the last thing and change Hancock's Brigade Orders to Assault. And he successfully changed orders, which is great. And I'm going to go ahead and end turn. And what we're going to do is we're going to watch this unfold. Yes, I'm sorry about the frying rain sound. Unfortunately, I haven't figured out how to turn that off. So we have to deal with it periodically because the battle actually happened in the rain. I've turned off the weather and rain graphics, but I've still got the sound going. Alright, so what you'll see is that as this battle now unfolds, what happens is it has zoomed out, and it's showing us things from a further out top-down view where the units are shown by their icons, and you can see sort of their facing and their unit type based on NATO symbols. And what I've got turned on by default, and you can on or off in the game, I've got the detailed combat reports turned on. And so I'm going to just walk you through this first one here a little bit. And what we've got here is the Lynchburg, Virginia battery attacked the 6th Maine Infantry. I'm going to walk you through this a little bit, and then we'll go through the others just more quickly. And we can see the effective strength of this battery is 60. They've got 6-pounder smooth bores at 375 yards. There's a random roll that's factored in. That's 41% in this case. And here at the top level, it gives you the results. So they caused 1 casualty. The new strength of the 6th Maine is 699 men, and they caused a fairly trivial amount of morale damage as a result of causing that 1 casualty. That's all you really need to know at the top level. But if you delve into it, you can get the firefight details where we can actually see how it calculated that 1 casualty. And we can see that what we ended up here was we started out with 26 casualties being caused. and we had a +5 bonus for attacks against targets over 350 strength. That was modified down because the 6-pounders are really not amazing cannons, and they're firing at range 5, so that was decreased from that. They had no ranging on my unit. They hadn't fired on it before. Their brigade order, they had just apparently moved into position, so they had recently marched. The General Deering, who's attached to the brigade, his artillery rating is good. Their formation, my formation, no modifiers from that. The rain decreased it from 2 to 1, and that's where we ended up. And as we get a little closer, some of these combat reports will get a little bit more involved. Now you'll see our first battery of the New York artillery counterattacked and did much the same back to them. So we've got counter battery fire going on between the artillery batteries now. And we've got some attempts to fire at what couldn't be effective range, but in the rain and with the other modifiers, no casualties were caused. So what you'll mainly see this first turn is some of the artillery batteries starting to range in on each other, starting to cause some minor casualties. Once they're ranged in, they'll stop losing those. They'll lose those no range modifiers. But of course, one of the other things that happens, and that happened historically on Civil War battlefields, is that the smoke would also build up. So one of the modifiers you'll see as we go on is that smoke will start to have an impact and will decrease the effectiveness of fire once units get pretty well covered in their own smoke clouds. And here we have the first fire from the South Carolina infantry that's in the redoubt against the 49th Pennsylvania that moved up. They caused them 3 casualties, and the 49th Pennsylvania caused them 1 back. And a similar exchange between the 6th South Carolina and the 6th Maine. The South Carolina has smoothbore muskets and mini rifles, so like the 6th Maine, they're also most effective up close, and they're not going to do too much until I actually get in close. I'm sorry if the sounds are too loud. I hope you can still hear me. I'm afraid, being a relative novice to the Twitch streaming, that I'm not sure how to adjust that down without adjusting my voice down too, so we're going to have to live with it for now, and if I do this again, I'll make sure I square that away. So at the end of this turn, which was our turn, it gives us a little report for day 1 at 3 p.m., and it tells us the casualties, who fired at what, gives us a total, and now we're going to go into the AI turn. I'm going to let the AI do its work and resolve that. And we can see the AI making its moves. Just like for your turn, when you can see the AI's units, you can actually see their move arrows and get pretty good information on them. But some of this also depends on your higher echelons. So for example, in the larger battles, the core echelon is the one that really helps you determine intelligence. So how well you penetrate the fog of war and how much information you have on enemy units is also something that comes from how good your core command is. The core command also has control of things like scouts, so you can actually use your core commander to send out scouts to other locations and try to see what you can see and see what you can figure out about what enemy units are where. So again, we've got some, this is basically just harassing fire. There's very little that's effective yet at this range, but in short order, in a couple turns, we will be seeing a lot of action going on. Next turn, we'll be right up close to these redoubts. For now, we've got the artillery exchanging fire again. And one of the things I should also mention is the more time your units spend moving, the less effective they're going to be firing. It's just a function of available time. So you can see here when the 49th Pennsylvania fired at the 6th South Carolina, on this line down here, they lost a decent amount of the casualties they would have caused because of the amount of movement that they spent during that turn moving instead of firing. Your best recipe for maximum casualties is to be fresh, to be up close, and to not be obscured by smoke, and to be in good weather. So here we have the report of the AI's turn. And at this point, the Union has lost 12 casualties, the Confederates 10. This is really not leaving much of a dent yet. But now it's back to our turn. And you can see some of the smoke starting to build up. And this is where we're now going to move in. If we take a look here at the unit roster again, you see that all our units are still in quite good shape. There are really very few casualties have been taken, and you can also see that everyone's still in command. So I'm going to go ahead and move the 49th Pennsylvania down here to take this side of the readout. And it's really just left-click to select a unit, then left-click where you want it to move, and right-click on a hex that it's not moving to if you want to change its facing. So I'm left-clicking to move them in, and if I wanted to change the facing, I could right-click somewhere outside their movement to have them change facing. I'm going to take the 5th Wisconsin and move them down closer to this redoubt. The 33rd New York, I'm going to march them down to here. And here we're going to try to change formation. Okay, so they just changed formation into line, which is great. And we're going to take the 7th Maine. We're going to move them in this direction as well. Okay, and finally, let's go up and move General Smith a little bit closer to the action. And we'll just click again to speed him up. And I will use General Smith's ability now. You see, he is connected up command-wise with General Hancock, and now the focus hex ability has come into it. It's no longer grayed out. So we're going to designate this readout as receiving our combat focus. And I'm going to also take General Hancock and use his Urge unit ability on the 6th Maine to give them some movement back and make them a little bit more effective in this coming battle. It should be noted also that for the scenarios where we have rain, we also include, I think in all cases, a no rain variant. Gil will have to correct me if I'm wrong in all cases, but I know we include many no rain variants if you want to see how the battle would have unfolded without the rain. I know there's one battle, Mill Springs, where the rain actually has a pretty huge impact because some of the Confederate forces were actually still equipped with flintlock muskets, Revolutionary War era stuff, and they really didn't work well in the rain, whereas the Union had much better, more modern weaponry. And what we'll do here is we'll make one last move with the New York battery here. And we should be pretty happy with that. And then let's get the battalion of the 33rd New York crossing here. Try to get them across the stream. And we'll just all tab that again because Twitch twitched. And I think we're just about set there. Can't think of anything else I need to do, so on we go. Oh, I did want to show you guys a little something else. Some of these buttons here on the top. So this one is kind of an overlay that shows you the casualties caused in the last turn. This gives you a history of your turn reports. This gives you a lot of really nice charts that you can look at. So the strength of your different arms, and the morale of each force, the casualties, the overall score, and your unit kills by unit. So you can look through at the end of the battle and see what all of them did. And you can also have a Brigade Orders overlay. And it's actually a good thing we turned that on because... Oh, no, those are okay. Yep, the generals are still in march, and that's fine. Everything else I've got in assault. So that can be a quick way to visually tell yourself if you've missed some Brigade Orders that you should have changed or not. And let's go ahead and go to the resolution. So now we're getting closer. We've got the Lynchburg battery now opening fire on the 4th Maine. We're getting closer. They're now firing at us from 300 yards. They've caused 4 casualties. now there's the first exchange of fire between the 6th South Carolina and the 6th Maine. And let's look at this in a little more detail. So we've got 6 casualties caused to each side. And in this case, 15 minus 0.15 morale damage. And the main change here was some losses due to, okay, we've got the sustained volley ability of the 6th Maine kicking in, we've got the weather kicking in, the Brigade Order advance, the tactical rating, skirmishers are deployed. All those are affecting the casualties, bringing them down from the maximum possible to a lower number. The 6th Maine similarly would have caused a fair amount more, but they spent most of their movement moving in there. And the 6th South Carolina had changed their facing to face the 6th Maine. Now, what we've got here is a bonus counterattack, is what we call it. So we set the focus hex to be on the 6th South Carolina in the readout. So that's the division helping. And we've also got Winfield, Scott Hancock, with his 75% coordination bonus, also helping out those 2 adjacent units. The end result here is that the 6th Maine just got to shoot at the South Carolina, got another volley out at South Carolina before they were able to respond, and now they've responded. We've got a little bit more counter-battery fire going on between the artillery batteries. The ordnance rifles of the 1st Battery New York Artillery have found the range on the Lynchburg battery. They've caused 5 casualties, leaving 49 men in that battery. And they take 4 more. The ordnance rifles are actually quite nice, especially at range. They're definitely a much better artillery piece than the 6-pounders that the Confederates are dealing with here. And you can see this battery did take a pot shot at the 6th South Carolina infantry. That's largely influenced by the focus hex from the division. They didn't actually do any damage, thanks probably most part to the range and the readout. And now the 49th Pennsylvania has added its fire, and again you can see we started out at 76 after the Springfield Rifles firepower was factored into the roll, but we lost a good half of that because of the amount of movement that we spent moving into position. We lost a fair amount more from, again, being the first volley at this range, and the weather, and the fact that the defenders in a fort is what brought us down from 38 casualties down to 9. So that's where the redoubt had a very major effect. The 6th South Carolina is counterattacking, and the 49th Pennsylvania takes another volley into the 6th South Carolina. The 5th Wisconsin with its Springfield Rifles is in range of Steedman's battalion and the other redoubt, and fire is starting to be exchanged there. If you guys want me to go into more detail on any of these combat reports, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to be only occasionally diving in and for the most part giving you the highlights to keep things moving along. I know a lot of people sometimes prefer to just turn these off, and that's something you can do as well. And then you can always dive into the unit-by-unit details afterwards for detail. And what we can also see here is that we killed a captain in the Lynchburg, Virginia battery, so that's going to affect it. So we're up to 49 casualties for the Confederates now, and 34 for the New Union, and I apologize for that. I forgot to turn off my phone. Learning all kinds of useful things today. And now the AI is doing its turn. So you can see it's moving the 4th South Carolina a little bit up on our flank. And what we can see here, based on the color codes, is that a new brigade has now entered the action. You see those guys with the red border but the blue interior. They do not match up with the guys we've been fighting. So that's another brigade that's coming in to reinforce the Confederates. And what we can see with that entirely red unit there, that's cavalry. That's an independent cavalry unit, and it's entirely red, which matches the outside border, so we're going to assume that's an independent cavalry units attached to whatever that Confederate division is. So we got a lot of movement going on, some ineffective fire. And the 6-pounders of the Lynchburg battery are taking a few more men out of the 6th Maine. And the continuing exchange of fire at this redoubt. Now, one of the things you're always looking at is what's the morale ending up at. So we can see here the defender's morale is at 2 right now. When your morale goes to 0 or negative, that's when your unit is going to start to break. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to rout. They might just retreat, they might panic, they may disorder, or they might outright rout. And these types of results can also happen at positive morale values. You can have an unlucky situation where panic spreads through the ranks, or there's some disorder, or a unit retreats, but it becomes much more likely, and a rout is really only possible when you have a unit that has actually gone into negative morale. Once the unit goes into negative morale, you really need to use a combination of things. The Brigade Orders, the efforts of your officers to try to rally that unit. The regiment commander will be doing his best, but if a unit is down in low negative morale, it's probably going to take a while. If you catch a unit that's only down at, like, say, -1 or around 0, then it's very probable that you're going to be able to, with some decent tactics, turn that unit around and get it back into battle fairly soon, though perhaps not at its original level of zeal. And you can see, by the way, here, I'm just going to show real quickly here the modifiers for smoke at the end that they're starting to affect, because there's smoke in both the attackers and the defender's hex. So the skirmishers that we've got deployed for the attacking units and the smoke are definitely helping us out a bit here. And the fort is really helping the Confederates out. We're continuing to counter battery fire the Lynchburg battery. So here's again our summary report of what's happened here. And now it comes back to us. We get the lovely rain sound that you all enjoy. Now we can start to take a look at what each of these units is doing. And I should note, I haven't been using it, but you can zoom in, and you can also zoom further out. The further out you zoom, eventually these symbols come in to replace the unit sprites, but it's up to you which level of zoom you feel most comfortable playing at. So the 6th Maine here, as we can see, their morale is down to 2.6 out of a starting 3.5, but they're still nowhere near their breaking strength. So we're happy to continue right now. We believe the Confederates are down lower morale than we are. So I'm actually going to see what we can do here as far as just breaking their morale and taking this redoubt that way. I'm going to use Hancock to urge this unit. That can also recover. I should say earlier I mentioned that you can't recover strength. It's not actually entirely true. The type of strength that's represented by stragglers and those types of losses can be recovered by using the urge unit order. You don't recover a huge amount, but it can help. So if you have a unit that's in really bad shape, using urge unit from your brigade commander can help reconstitute it a bit. Again, over the longer scenarios, that can have an impact. And over here, we're going to continue our march in on this redoubt. I'm going to turn them to face. Now, the 33rd New York is going to march in that way. What you'll see, oh, it just disappeared, but there was a Confederate flag here, which represented a Confederate unit that we thought was there, but we were no longer sure of effectively who exactly it was, which way they were facing, and so on. And there are those types of fog of war elements. You can lose information on units, you can lose sight of them, You can certainly be surprised by units popping out of the woods or out of other areas of limited visibility. You can see right now, because our unit is marching in front of our guns now have a pretty limited line of fire down here. I'm going to accept that for this turn and get them out of the way next turn. Over here, this battery is doing just fine because it can still counter battery them. And I think the last thing is up here to get these guys closer to getting that flank position. It was risky leaving our flank open. The Confederates can do a flank movement. If you're playing this, with a creative player, or if the AI is feeling particularly aggressive, it might come in on your flank. Not necessarily up this high, but you could be surprised. And I wanted to show you a couple more buttons. So this brings up the scenario briefing for any scenario that you're playing. So this button here cycles you through the victory hexes. So when you're playing a scenario and you want to see where all the victory hexes are, you can just keep clicking this and it'll bring you to all of them. It centers you on the current unit, changes what you're highlighting. So you can highlight whether a unit is, for example, out of command. Well, let's walk through it a little bit. So this highlights moved units. You see there's sort of a yellow highlight that shows you which units have moved. This highlights disordered units, units that are ready to fight, units that are out of command, units that are out of supply or need resupply, are not near a supply wagon, and turning off the highlight. And I just realized we failed a command check over here, so I'm going to move Hancock. I'm going to risk moving him a little closer to make it easier for him to get these guys back in command, so that he can hopefully help coordinate them. And I'm going to go ahead and urge this other unit too, since Hancock is having a splendid moment and can urge 2 units this turn. I'm going to use General Smith to once again focus the division on the redoubt. So I think we're done. Let me take a quick look at the chat here, see if there's any other questions there. Yes, so bayonet. What we can do, and I'm not going to do it yet. I might do it here once we get close to this redoubt, but you can tell your units, for example, if I click on this, right now it may charge, right now it must charge, and right now it will never charge. Charge combat is your melee. That's fixed bayonets and go in there and push those guys off, and that's resolved differently from fire combat. It also has its own report. It can be very bloody and very dangerous. It's very decisive generally. I feel like we're going to get a good result here without needing to resort to that on this redoubt. Depending on how long it takes, we may want to get a little bit more aggressive with the other redoubt, but charging forts can also end very poorly for the person charging them. And the other question here was the USA score. Right, so let's take a look at the score here. Well, right now we've got 2 of 4 victory hexes, and the score multiplier is right now 1.2 to 1 because of the casualty ratio right now. So we're at 2 to 1. How can we get back up to 3 to 1? Well, you may recall I moved away that unit that was guarding this victory objective here, and until I get these guys back into place, I'm not earning anything for that. I've left my flank open. Once I get those guys back into place, and with my artillery holding these 2, we should be back up to 3. So let's go ahead and end turn here. So we've got the continued fire going on as I approach the other redoubt, which is still with units moving in. With units moving around and units in the redoubt, it doesn't cause too much damage until you get up close when people are in the fort. Oh, as for the scenarios, so we've actually got some of the key scenarios from each theater. So this is Williamsburg. We also have 1st Manassas, which is sort of the biggest battle in this release. And there's also Mill Springs from Kentucky, which was basically the first significant battle in that middle theater. And there's also Wilson's Creek, which was the first significant battle out west. So we call it Brother Against Brother, the Drawing of the Sword, because it's really about sort of the beginning fights in each of the theaters of the Civil War across that first year. And I wish I could show you all of them. Maybe if I can do this again sometime, I'll do another battle for you guys. But for this one, I thought it was best to just start with one of the small ones and show off how things went there. Now what happened here is we actually managed to drive off the 6th South Carolina. Our last volley from the 49th Pennsylvania was good enough that the South Carolina was forced to retreat. We basically pushed them back morale-wise. They hadn't yet gotten to terrible morale, but they failed to check. They retreated, and the 49th Pennsylvania made a check, and they actually exploited into the South Carolina's location. So the 49th Pennsylvania has succeeded in taking the redoubt. And you can see here, we caused 12 damage. They're down to 1.7 morale, but it was enough for them to actually retreat. Now that was a little bit of bad luck on the Confederacy's part. For the most part, they really should have probably stuck in there for another turn, but we'll certainly take it. And now the 49th Pennsylvania, having exploited, they now went ahead and put a volley into the 6th South Carolina, who were retreating and now no longer in the redoubt, caused them 12 more casualties. And what you can see happened here, I'll just scroll to the very bottom of this to show you an important thing. We can see the 6th South Carolina had gotten below their breaking strength. So this line here that says defender below breaking strength, that modifies their morale loss. So that's why they went and lost 0.9 morale, almost a full morale point. They're down below 1 point of morale now. And then they were forced to retreat again. So the 6th South Carolina is just pulling back from that fort as quickly as they can at this point, which is great because it opens up a march for us down this side of the Confederate line. Over here, we're still exchanging relatively ineffective fire. The 5th Wisconsin has Springfield rifles. They're picking off a few guys, but for the most part, just like with the other redoubt battle, we're going to have to get close to really do a whole lot. It's worth noting these initial redoubts were held by battalions, so we're talking the Confederates had 200 some odd men in each of these redoubts, and we're moving on these redoubts with regiments that each have like 600, 500, 600, 700 men. So we're moving on these 200 guys with 14 or 1500 guys. So it's kind of understandable that they might feel like retreating is a good idea. Our artillery actually managed to spot and take a shot at the staff and escort unit. Now you don't see that all that often. The staff and escort units are basically the generals and their staffs as they ride around the battlefield, and they're not as vulnerable as you might think because they're not normally likely to be targeted. They're often not even seen, but they can be targeted, and once they are targeted, that can significantly increase your risk. Obviously of losing an important commander. You can also have a chance of losing a commander if he's just close to one of your units that is in combat. There's the assumption that bullets flying around in the air and he might be riding over, urging the units on and so forth, that he might also have a risk of losing. So if you want them completely safe, keep them way the heck away from the battlefield, but obviously that's not where they should be if you want them to be giving you their best contribution towards the performance of your units. Alademi, if you would like a campaign, I would suggest taking a look at Forge of Freedom, also by Western Civilization Software, which we did a promo video of at the start of this, which basically gives you the entire Civil War in a grand strategy level, along with some tactical battles. But I should note that goes into much less detail on the tactical battles. It's more of a randomly generated tactical battles, whereas Brother Against Brother, which is the new game, is extremely realistic, non-random, very accurate when it comes to tactical battles. We believe, it's our opinion, that it sets a new benchmark for that. And you can see here that we caused 36 casualties to the Confederacy this turn. We took 7. So that was a very good turn, thanks to the 49th Pennsylvania and the 6th Maine taking that other redoubt. So now the AI has its chance to push back to us. Sometimes you do know if you've killed a commander. Yeah, you can get messages as to whether you've killed a commander. I'm not sure if you always get them. That would actually have to be answered by Gil or Eric as far as the absolute definitive. Do you always know that or not, or is it covered somewhat by fog of war, and sometimes you'll know and sometimes you don't? Anecdotally, I think you only get them some of the time. So what we've seen here now is 3 new Confederate regiments coming in. You see these 3 units here coming in. So taking this second readout looks like it's not going to be nearly as easy as taking the first. The 6th South Carolina has gone down into this sort of river stream bed here, and they're still trying to put some harassing fire into us. Right, couldn't hit an elephant at that distance. Famous example. Alright, so when these guys marched in here, they also came back into line of sight of my artillery back here. And you can see those ordnance rifles are now starting to attack the 24th Virginia. The 24th Virginia has been brought down to 3.5 morale and a strength of 734. So we're talking, that's a lot of good morale infantry coming in on the Confederate side that's now marching against us. And that concludes the AI's turn. So it's now 4 p.m. We fought out a full hour here. So let's see what we're going to do. I'm going to move the 7th Maine down here. Try to cover this flank, but I'm actually going to urge them so they have a little more movement. See if they can change into line. So they can. They're able to change into line. I'm going to move the 33rd New York up to try to contest the 5th North Carolina, which has a strength of approximately 450 men and a morale of approximately 4. But they do have smoothbore muskets, so they're going to have to get in close. And the 21st Virginia, which now we're estimating has about 800 men and a morale of 4. So the 5th Wisconsin going to move up here to try to get rid of this other battalion of the 6th South Carolina, and we'll face them more directly. We'll move Hancock over to help out where we are facing the new Confederate reinforcements. And I'm going to move the 49th Pennsylvania out of the redoubt and down here onto the flank of the 6th South Carolina. They seem to have rallied enough to still be shooting at me. From there, we're going to see if we can drive them off entirely. And I'll move the 6th Maine into the redoubt. Okay, our first battery has good line of fire to 2 enemy units. We'll leave them there. This battery still has range and is ranged in on the 4th Virginia. You can see maybe this little red cross here now that is shown up. That shows that we're already ranged in there. And we see the General Smith is still in range of Hancock, but General Smith failed to coordinate the focus hex ability this turn. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the 49th and give them Hancock's other urge unit to help make them a little more effective. And finally, we've almost reached the flank position that I wanted to guard up here. So we'll continue moving the 33rd New York into there. Now, I prefer playing with these sprites when I'm in close, but if you prefer to play with the unit icons all the time, you can certainly do that just by using this. You can also turn off the move from arrows if you like. You can also turn on an overlay that shows you the unit stats comparatively. And we went over the unit highlights. So there are a lot of options that you can turn on, and they're really informational. They add a lot of extra symbology and highlights and things like that for you to look at. So if you prefer to play with the battlefield looking as clean as possible, you can turn those off. I find them to be very handy visual aids to keep myself organized. Let's take one more quick look at our unit roster before we end the turn. So we can see here, again, our force is in pretty good shape. Our morale is not too bad. Our supplies are still doing great. And we really haven't lost that many men. So let's continue. Throckmorton. The ground scale is 75 yards per hex, and the time scale is 20 minutes per turn. And we've generally got regiments, battalions, and in some cases maybe a company or two on the map. And regiments can be split to cover more than one hex if you need to extend the line. Harold, yes, I'm sure you could mod the rain sound effect to remove it if you hate it. And Tony, we're not releasing on Steam initially, but if you purchase from us and we release on Steam in the future, you'll get a free Steam key. So the unit movement speed also depends on your brigade orders and the unit formation. If you can move very quickly, if you're in march and the brigade is in march, once you have your brigade orders set to focus on combat, it modifies how the units perform. So it's a really good idea to keep your brigade together and to make sure that if you need a lot of them to be moving, that you're still in a brigade movement-oriented order and that you're in movement-oriented formations. And that if you're ready to fight, then you switch over to the fighting orders and the fighting formations, which is mainly line with skirmishers and things like that. So now we're starting to get into the fighting around the other redoubt. The 6th South Carolina is counterattacking the 5th Wisconsin Infantry, and the 5th Wisconsin Infantry is firing right back. We'll have the edge there over time, thanks to our great numbers. And there we go. So the second volley, the 5th Wisconsin, this may have been a bonus volley, thanks to the qualities of this brigade. They did 17 more men, casualties to the Steedman's Battalion of the 6th South Carolina, and Steedman's Battalion failed another check and retreated. And we made another exploitation. So you can see the exploitation move happen there. We've still got counter battery fire going on, and our ordnance rifles are getting the better of the 6-pounders, as we would expect. And now the good old 49th Pennsylvania came upon the 6th South Carolina in this stream bed where they retreated to. The 6th South Carolina unloaded a volley into us. They've used up some of their movement, as you can see. The end result was it was not a very effective volley, but we did 14 men to them. That knocked off another point of their morale and put them back into negative morale. So we're trying to make them rout. We're trying to see this battalion off for good. We'll see how that goes. And you can see also here the fog of war that I talked about. This unit on this Confederate flag here, that's another Confederate unit that we're not entirely sure what it is, but we know there's something over there. And for those who joined late, I should say again that all these question marks you see on the battlefield serve two purposes. This is the tutorial scenario, so in here they also have the instructions and tips on how to play. You just click on them to right-click on them to get that information. On the normal battles, They represent points of historical interest, and they often have interesting bits of historical trivia related to the location and how the battle unfolded that you can find out about by clicking on them, sort of a little virtual tour guide. Okay, so 24th Virginia has started to volley with the 33rd New York. Again, with the Confederate smoothbore muskets, they're not going to be as effective as our Springfield rifles at range 2, but as soon as we close the distance, their muskets will actually have a slight advantage for units of equal size. The attack roll 41%, so every time you have a combat, there's a random factor as well as all these more deterministic factors. So the deterministic factors, come down to things like the number of men and what type of weapon they have and whether there's smoke or so on. The roll is basically the random factor. There are also other things like, what the brigade commander or division commander have done to influence the battle that can also be, somewhat random, because based on what checks they pass and based on whether a unit is nearby another regiment from its brigade and can coordinate with it. But the roll is probably the biggest of those random factors, so it has a pretty substantial impact. Represents all the other things that we may not be keeping in mind that can influence, how quickly a unit gets a volley off, how effective that volley might be. And here we see another summary. So we're up to 87 casualties to the Union side, 186 for the Confederate side. So we're giving substantially better than we're taking right now. And it's worth noting that historically, Hancock gave substantially better than he got in this battle. He came in on the Confederate flank, the Confederates reinforced and counterattacked, and they found themselves effectively coming into a bit of a buzzsaw. We've set up this tutorial scenario for you to play as the Union. You're welcome to play it as the Confederates too if you prefer, but it's designed to play as the Union, and it's also designed to be a little bit favored towards the Union as a result, so that you don't get run over in your first battle, hopefully. So we've got our counter battery fire happening again, and now there's an important note here. You see, we've been firing at this unit of 6-pounders with our ordnance rifles, and they started out at strength about 50 or so. They're now down to 31 men. And you can see we just knocked a half a morale point off them with this last shot because they've just gotten below their breaking strength. So that artillery unit is going to want to get out of there pretty soon. As our ordnance rifles keep up the counter battery fire, we're probably going to see them retreating and trying to move out of the way, as our infantry units move in on them too. But the good news is we've started to really hammer them before we move our infantry towards them. I didn't really want to move in on them when they were in good shape and fresh and see what they could do at range 1. And for those of you who might not be Civil War buffs, artillery in the Civil War came in all different shapes and sizes, and we model all of it, so you'll see all different kinds of weapons, both the infantry small arms, but also the artillery types, and they all have very different performances, especially among the different types of artillery. But there are many types of artillery that become much more effective the closer range you get, because effectively they can fire canister at close range, which is sort of like turning the cannon into a gigantic shotgun. So approach artillery from the front at your own peril. If you're approaching a fresh artillery unit from the front and you're getting into close range with it, you have to be a little wary. So the 5th Wisconsin rather, is putting some more fire into Steedman's battalion. Remember, they retreated, but they still have positive morale. They didn't break. They just pulled back in the face of these two huge regiments bearing down on them. The The 49th Pennsylvania has now knocked the 6th South Carolina down almost to a full negative point of morale. There's a good chance that they will rout soon. Another reason why you really want to get your enemy's units into negative morale is that when you're looking at the force morale, those units that are in negative morale, they also weigh down that enemy average morale a fair amount. And for their own brigade, when you look at a brigade, there's a rule that looks at how effective the brigade still is, how many of its regiments are in good shape, how many are in bad shape, and if too many of the regiments of a brigade are in bad shape, you can basically have a cascading failure where the rest of the brigade loses a fair amount of morale. It can make the brigade very fragile and make it possible to effectively rout an entire brigade in short order. Ostwind Flak. None of these early battles really were sieges of that type. The attack on Fort Magruder does involve a fair amount of artillery on both sides, but it's, again, artillery in the first year of the war, when both sides were still really getting a handle on just how tough some of these entrenchments and static defenses could be and how to deal with them. So you're certainly going to have artillery both in the fort. At Fort Magruder, at Williamsburg, you can have artillery on the Union side firing at them, but it's not going to be the type of larger siege battles that happened later in the war. Wilson's Creek is a pretty dynamic battle. It involves a surprise attack by the Union, splitting its force into two columns, coming upon an encamped Confederate army. Mill Springs is an attack by a Confederate force on an encamped Union army. And then First Manassas, of course, or First Bull Run, as you may call it, is a massive battle between the first big battle between the Union and Confederate armies of the Civil War, where they were fighting across fords and other crossing points and hills across a pretty wide map with a lot of maneuvering, a lot of counter maneuvering. Again, a pretty fluid battle. So the AI has completed its turn. And we can see this arrow tells us the 6th South Carolina here did move pretty quickly in that direction, so that is a route move that most likely happened there. And they are at 0 morale is our estimate. And we're going to start moving the 6th Maine and the 49th Pennsylvania in towards the rest of the brigade to try to sweep up this flank. Let's take a look and see. So everybody's in command. We're all doing fine. The 33rd New York here, though. I'm going to turn the 33rd New York to face the North Carolina regiment there. I'm going to march the 5th Wisconsin into this redoubt. Now they've spotted the 24th Virginia as well, and you can see this Confederate brigade is really trying to move on our flank. I'm going to move the 7th Maine into the woods a bit to maybe give them a surprise. Oops, and we've run into another Confederate unit. We don't know exactly what it is, but there is another Confederate unit in there that we have discovered. I'm going to let my artillery in the 6th Maine and 49th Pennsylvania hopefully deal with these units here and hope that they won't get into the rear of the 5th Wisconsin. And finally, I'll move these guys into here and switch them back into line formation. Now down here, I think I will use the urge unit on the 49th Pennsylvania to try to keep them strong. And I will put the focus hex on the Lynchburg artillery because I want them ideally eliminated before they do too much damage to my infantry. I'll move General Smith down a little bit further. So right now we're doing well. Again, as I mentioned, this scenario is balanced towards the Union, but we're up to 4-1 right now. We've taken both readouts that we were looking to take, but with the reserve Confederate brigade pushing in on our flank, and with these units still to deal with, we really can't push down to take this last objective just yet. So we will have to leave that for now. We'll go ahead and end the turn. And we're starting to again exchange fire with this new Confederate brigade on the left. Okay, so it turns out that was the 4th South Carolina there. We caused them 7 casualties. We had moved, we have no ranging, etc. They caused us 11. They unloaded on us. We walked right into range 1 with them. They had moved, which is good for us. I think it would have been a lot worse without that. They actually had a potential of causing 76 casualties to us without moving, but we did have skirmishers, which reduced our casualties substantially. Rather than having our whole regiment blunder in there in line, our skirmishers came upon them first and were able to thus reduce the effect on us. But they still caused us 11, which was a pretty respectable first volley. I agree, Oswin Flack. I think we could make a good Napoleonic game out of this. I think we could also do a good American Revolutionary War game out of this as well. Okay, so this damaged Lynchburg, Virginia battery, they're down to 26 men effective strength now, firing their 6-pound smoothbores. And they didn't manage to do a whole lot against us, fortunately. We're opening up back on them. With the smoke and the movement, we're not doing a whole lot to them as well, and the weather, firing while it's raining beyond range 1 is not terribly effective either, so... At the same time, that artillery unit doesn't have much left, so the more volleys we put into them, the better, the sooner they will break. Our Springfield rifles are having a better effect at range 2 than their muskets as expected. And now we can see the Lynchburg, Virginia battery is now down to negative morale, so they're probably going to rout next turn. These remaining men here. They're down to 14 men remaining, manning these 6-pounders. We got them down to negative 0.5 morale now. They've caused 3 more casualties to us. These guys are doing quite a last stand around the guns. Our ordnance rifles contributing to the carnage there. And the 6th Maine knocks them down to a full negative morale point. Oh, that's a good point, Miguel. I didn't talk about heights yet, so let me talk about that as soon as this combat round is over. Looks like we're still exchanging fire with the 4th South Carolina Battalion. Now they've got 400 men. Our 7th Maine has 500, and we did pretty well this turn. We've got ranging on them now, and we've done 16 in that volley. It still looks to be a pretty even fight, though. We'll let the AI do its turn, and then I'll talk about elevations and ravines. And the abatis. We're going to be releasing the game manual along with the game release tomorrow, so even if you don't buy the game, you can take a look at the game manual tomorrow. We'll have it posted up for download. Got a nice flank shot into Stevens' line there. Now the Confederates have moved. See, the AI moved an extra regiment in. They're really trying to gang up on our regiment in the woods there. But that also leaves them a bit exposed to our regiments by the redoubt. They're trying to fire on our rear with that battalion out there in the open. And right now we're just chipping away, 12 men, 12 casualties in each volley right now, as these units are starting to wear each other down. Our 7th Maine is down to 2 morale. We're going to have to help them out for sure. We can also see on the AI's turn that the Lynchburg, Virginia battery is much farther back. They routed on the AI's turn. I also see a message here that one of their units became shocked by the artillery fire. So let's talk a little bit about elevations and such. One of the things that, let's see if I can find some actually on this map. Well, you can see these little white hash marks. Those show us the ravines on this map. Here are some elevation marks. So up here in the north, you see we also have these sort of dashed white lines. Those basically show the elevation contours. So you can see down here is the base level. Up here, and you can see this in the mouse over text in the top right, it says height 1. And then up here is height 2. And there's a full line of sight system in the game that looks based on each height level is about 50 feet. So it looks based on what height level you're at and calculates how far you can see and what you can see. So obviously being up on an elevation is good in that respect. It also helps you, can help you out in combat. And the elevation levels, these little white dashed lines, just give you a really handy way of seeing exactly where those elevation levels are. Personally, I really like the look of them. I think they're subtle enough that they don't distract from the map, but they're clear enough that you're not wondering where the height changes happen. Also, you might have been wondering about these things here, which look like a bunch of wood or trees lying on the ground. Those are abatis, which is basically felled trees and wood lying on the ground. It's meant to make it difficult terrain to travel through, and the Confederates cleared a lot of the woods around Fort Magruder specifically to create abatis to make it hard to march in on the fort. You'll also see some of these features here. These are rifle pits. And if we were actually to get close to the fort itself, these inner areas here, that's the fort proper. I think that about sums it up, and then we've got these readouts as well. The noise that sounds like bacon is actually the rain falling. I've turned off the rain graphics, but we still periodically are getting the rain noise. So we got a lot of smoke on the battlefield now. What we're going to do here is march to help the 7th Maine, because they're going to be in trouble if we don't. So we're going to move the 33rd New York. Oh no. So we tried to move the 33rd New York up here to get in that flank. They did not. They misinterpreted our order and marched straight forward here. They're still on the flank. Not exactly where I wanted them though. But we'll give them an urge unit order to try to give them a little bit more. In fact, we're going to keep the 5th Wisconsin back. I'm going to actually turn them to face the 6th South Carolina Battalion. And I'm going to move the 6th Maine. Oh boy. The 6th Maine misinterprets and marches right in front of the 49th Pennsylvania. So this can happen, and it did happen. It's not as common with a good regiments and well-commanded brigade like this, but it will happen. So that slows us down a bit. We can also move Hancock back a bit because the 6th South Carolina Battalion is getting a little closer to him. And nobody's bothering them up there, so I think we're all set. What I'm also going to do, just for fun, guys, is I'm going to tell the 33rd New York that they must charge. Now, I don't expect this to go all that well, because the 23rd North Carolina is 650 men, and we're 477. We do have a bit of a flank on them, but, you know, I just don't feel like I should end the game without showing you guys how a charge works. I think we'll leave the 7th Maine as is, though. We'll tell them they may charge if they feel that they have a good opportunity. That leaves it up to the brigade and regiment commanders to decide. If we were concerned also that they were getting too far around our flank, we could also use this to split the 7th Maine into 2 units so we could extend our frontage, but there's no need for that just as yet. And let's take a quick look at some of these charts here. So you can see here now the strength of the infantry history. You can see we've been causing more damage to the Confederates than they've been causing to us. Cavalry, artillery, the morale, the casualties, and the score. So right now we're winning this scenario handily. We're causing more casualties than we've gotten. Our morale is starting to get a little lower, but we still got a fair margin. How does your break morale get determined? Well, it's really influenced by two things. There's sort of a base level that you start out at, and then if you have a good army leader, the army echelon level can help reduce your top command level can basically reduce your breaking morale point, and also having the highest current victory score can also reduce your break morale point. So if your army feels that it's winning, they'll hold on a little bit longer. If that switches, though, you can also get into a situation where when the tide turns, your break point increases and suddenly your army is very close to or might even break. Though we're talking about changes usually of fractions of a point, not something huge like an entire point. So the 7th Maine put a very good volley into the 5th North Carolina. 22 casualties caused, but their morale still seems to be up over 3. The 5th North Carolina put a pretty good volley into the 7th Maine as well, and we're now down below 2 morale. The 7th Maine puts out another fantastic volley here. 27 casualties caused. The 5th North Carolina knocked down almost half a morale point in one volley. The 5th North Carolina continues to reply, so the 7th Maine is currently getting the better of that exchange. The 5th Wisconsin we turned around is now shooting at that Confederate battalion that's still hanging around the middle of our line. The 23rd North Carolina panicked. So the 33rd New York, which we moved in on the flank, you may recall, they put a volley into the 23rd North Carolina, and the 23rd North Carolina was obviously rather discomfited by having a volley and a unit with fixed bayonets, I guess, getting ready to charge them coming in on their flank. So they took, quarter of a point of morale lost from the actual volley, but then they failed their morale check. They panicked, and now their morale gets reduced to -0.2, just like that. The 23rd North Carolina counterattacked and did do 9 casualties to the 33rd New York. So that's extremely good for us. We're very happy when an enemy unit panics like that. Boy, the 7th Maine has really put on a show here. This turn they are just doing a splendid job. And the 4th South Carolina was forced to retreat after that last volley, and the 7th Maine makes an exploitation move. They caused another 26. They've knocked more than a full morale point off the 4th South Carolina in these last 20 minutes. Knocked them down to below 2, thanks to these outstanding rolls. They got another 87%. I mean, they're doing some really good work here. They've got a good general attached to their brigade, rather for their regiment. Tactical rating of good. That's adding 15. I'm sure we're getting some contributions from Hancock's level, but really good job on their part. So here's the charge. Oh boy. So this has not gone well for us from what I can see so far. The 23rd North Carolina, even though they panicked, they met the charge of the 33rd New York Infantry. And you can see what happened here. We lost some from the rain and such, but they gained from the number of men they got. They got a 93% attack roll, so they did about as well as you will ever do on a charge, on meeting a charge. And that and their weapons bumped them up to where they just caused 225 casualties to us in this melee. Lost 7 morale. And let's see what we did. We charged them. We caused them 55. So they basically put a last-minute volley into our faces and countercharged us, and we really did not do well there. We did drive them back, though. We caused 1 morale loss, but we lost most of our regiment, and it's disordered. And that just didn't go too well for us. Yes, if you want decisive, fix bayonets. But be aware that you're taking your own fate into your hands. So once you get into melee, things can certainly go against you. It is just very decisive, but unless you've got a definite advantage, you are really rolling the dice to see which side is going to come out on top. Alright, so thanks to the charge, we actually took 273 casualties this turn. We caused 157, so we're up to about 400 casualties on each side. And the 33rd New York Infantry, probably no surprise here, makes a rout move. They pushed that charge, they drove the enemy unit back a hex, but they took so many casualties that they could not sustain it, and they've now broken. So the AI is now doing its moves. And we helped out the 7th Maine, but now that we've lost the 33rd New York as an effective regiment, we're going to have to move our other regiment out of the redoubt next turn if we want any hope of saving the 7th Maine there. They're still doing some great volleys, but the 7th Maine is down to 1.3 morale. They're simply not going to last forever. Okay, Steedman's battalion is now below breaking strength, so our artillery is now causing them pretty significant morale losses with each volley. Alright, the 5th North Carolina is adding their fire into the 7th Maine, knocked them down to about 1 morale now. The 4th South Carolina is contributing. The 7th Maine continues to actually give better than it gets. It is really proving itself to be a very effective unit for its size and position. Alright, and we can see that after routing or retreating last time, okay, so they rout again. That's expected. So they're back here now. Now, if we look at them, their morale is -5. Now, it's worth noting that in terms of your own average morale and force morale, a unit can never contribute more than its negative starting morale, so yes, that's a good point, Gil. So neither side gets a supply unit for this scenario because it's a short scenario and just intended as a starter. So we don't have the supply wagons on the map that would normally be resupplying our units. But what we can see here is they're at -5 morale. So we will urge them. So that got us back a half a morale point and a few men, but honestly, we just really need to expect that this unit is out of this battle. The losses they took were grievous, and their morale is down so low that we're not likely to be able to turn that around. The 7th Maine, however, is down to 1 morale, and probably I actually should have saved my urge for them. I'm going to move them back a bit and turn them down there so they're not quite in that pocket anymore. I'm going to march the 5th Wisconsin up to try to help out. Let's see if we get any more misinterpreted orders this turn. The 6th Maine is going to go try to finish off that very damaged artillery unit down there. And let's see. I'm going to change the artillery's facing it a bit. And I think we're good otherwise. We don't have the ability to focus. We only got 1 urge from Hancock, so we've used up all that our leaders can give us. Because of what happened with the 33rd New York, our average morale has dropped down to 2.11. We've still got room, but we're getting down there. And let me just take a quick look at the chat. So I think that's what we will do for now. Let's keep on rolling. South Carolina is starting to take some shots at the 5th Wisconsin that is moving up into their rear. They're starting to reorient there. They're not going to be very effective until they fully change facing. We found the 6th South Carolina again, down on that lower elevation there. And the 6th Maine is starting to work on them again. You can see that both the 6th South Carolina and that Lynchburg artillery, they had just rallied enough to be able to fight again. But that's not going to last long. They're almost back down to negative morale. Units that have broken and lost enough that they're beyond their break point, even though they can rally, it's usually something where you're really you're usually going to want to put them in a good position and have them on defense. They're really not going to be very effective anymore as an offensive unit or a unit that's really good for bad situations. They just won't have the morale left. Aha, the 7th Maine, which you may recall I left on May charge. Well, they decided to charge. Let's hope this goes better for us than the last one. The 5th North Carolina met their charge and caused them 65 losses and 2 morale lost, which is not good because I know we started at about 1, so this will use up most of the 7th Maine's morale. They won't necessarily rout, but it'll put them in a bad spot morale-wise. Oh, and that is one of the worst results we can get. So the charge degenerated into a firefight. That was actually not that uncommon in the Civil War. So they started the charge, and effectively a few of them got in, but most of the regiment did not press the charge home, got into close range, started firing. The enemy's firing into them, bayoneting the guys who did make it in, and then they start pulling back. So we only caused 12. We became disordered, and we only caused them about a half a point of morale loss. So that's unfortunately going to be probably a bad situation for the 7th Maine, and indeed that breaks them. So now we've got 2 broken units. I'm doing a really good job here. So I'm really going to have to start playing a bit more defense here. The Confederate AI here has broken my flank, except for the 5th Wisconsin. I've now got 1 regiment against about 3.5. So I've got to start getting pretty worried. The 49th Pennsylvania and the 6th Maine are going to have to... at least the 49th Pennsylvania is going to have to try to come and shore that up. Now, I don't expect that the 7th Maine is going to be in as bad shape as the 33rd New York, so we may yet be able to rally the 7th Maine. Okay, so we wounded a... I believe that's the officer in charge of the artillery there. Well, the Wisconsin boys are giving pretty good counter results. They're still in good morale, they're in good shape, but they're not going to stay that way if I let them get surrounded, so we're going to try to get them out of there soon. So, yep, James Deering, who was in charge of the Lynchburg battery, has been wounded. So we did see that. And we've got 2 units routing. So let's take a look. The 7th Maine is up here, and they're only at -1 morale, so we have, I think, oh no. Well, we have a good chance of rallying them. They have their own colonel, command good, leadership fair, so he has a decent chance of rallying them on his own. Hancock would normally be able to help, but unfortunately of all the turns, this turn he decided to get not 2, not 1, but 0 urge units, so Hancock is not able to help out right now, and they're also out of command. Actually, that may be why. Let me see here. Nope, he just has 0 urge units. General Smith, in charge of the division, though, does have the ability to set a focus hex, so... Boy, let's see. I'm going to move General Smith back a bit. I'm going to move Hancock over here a little. And the 49th Pennsylvania is switching into column and starting to redeploy into that direction. The 6th Maine. Well, guys, what do you think? Should I press it with the 6th Maine, or should I sort of hold here or try to gradually move them towards the center? I'll give you guys the choice on that. What do I do with the 6th Maine down here? They're near the Lynchburg artillery and the 6th South Carolina Battalion, both of which are very damaged units. If I press the attack into them, I would likely be able to break 1 or more of them. But our right flank has just broken. So do we pull them back? Do we try to press them in toward the center, toward the 5th Wisconsin, or do we have them follow the 49th Pennsylvania to redeploy toward the center of our line? Any votes? Let me know. In the meantime, I'm going to move the 5th Wisconsin. Move them back here and face them a bit toward the 5th North Carolina. Awful lot of routing going on up there. I'm also thinking the Confederates haven't shown up there yet, so I might move that battalion down, but right now that battalion's earning me a point. The Confederates are about to take back this redoubt. As soon as they take that back, that'll be a point for them. The casualties are about even. Right now I'm winning 3-0. That'll make it 2-1. and it would risk us ending up in a draw. The AI is pretty good at protecting leaders. I had that Lynchburg battery. I mean, you know, regimental leaders are with the unit, so as the unit takes casualties, there's always a risk. But the AI is not going to take its brigade and division and corps commanders and charge them out into where you can get them. And normally, you don't even see them. You know, it takes a few rolls for those to even be seen and engaged by your units. So leaders are generally safe, but over the course of these large battles, you will lose a few, a roughly historical amount, especially if they are close to the battle and helping their units. So the one vote here is attack is the best defense. So let's attack. I'm moving the 6th Maine forward, to heck with the flank, and facing them towards the battery. And I'm going to face this battery. Actually, they're fine. They can see the 5th North Carolina, so let's let them open up. They got a lot of smoke to fire through and rain, but I think we'll see what they can do. And oh, that's interesting. Cicero can urge unit. Alright, so let's end turn. And Edwin Mason rallied the 7th Maine Infantry, so fantastic news for us. The regimental commander, since we're only down to -1 morale, he managed to rally them. And poor James Deering has been wounded again. So you'll see the Lynchburg battery is down to basically nobody. we just wiped out the Lynchburg battery, which might have something to do with why James Deering, who was one of the last 2 men remaining there, was wounded. So I guess that was a good vote. We've wiped out that Confederate artillery unit, and now we can change the focus to the Confederate infantry battalion. So our ordnance rifles here, firing into the flank of the 5th North Carolina at range 525 yards, range 7, have still done 11 casualties. That's really nice to see. That's a good flanking fire that'll help us out if we can keep it up and they try to roll up our flank. And the 6th Maine is now starting work on... Oh, they're finishing up with the battery. They were still firing in this turn because the battery is still there until it's removed. So the 5th Wisconsin is now firing into the 5th North Carolina. Another volley with Springfield rifles from the 500 some odd men of the 5th Wisconsin. And the 5th Wisconsin seems to have definitely gotten some bonuses from Hancock and Smith here. They're putting volley after volley into that North Carolina regiment. The South Carolina battalion that was in the redoubt keeps putting harassing fire into the rear of the Wisconsin regiment, but they're not really being effective. We damaged them pretty badly earlier on. However, our other ordnance rifles are now opening up and have caused 18 more casualties to the 5th North Carolina. So you can see their morale was up closer to 3, like 2.8 or so. We've now knocked them down to below 2 this turn. So the casualties this turn definitely favored us, 54 to 2. So we're up to 622 casualties for the Confederates, 541 for the Union. And the 33rd New York is routing. The Lynchburg artillery is removed from the map. So following the previous round, now the AI gets its turn. The 5th North Carolina is moving further in. They're trying to go for those objectives. It's getting to past 5 p.m., but I think our ordnance rifles are going to have a rough... Ah, right. So I was originally planning to stop this about 20 minutes ago, but I didn't really want to leave you guys on a cliffhanger with the Confederate flank march actually succeeding. I think I'm just going to continue this one and finish things off, if you all don't mind. So, as long as my voice is lasting, we'll just see how this turns out. So there's one battery of ordnance rifles into the 5th North Carolina. And the 6th South Carolina still having very little effect on our 6th Maine there. See, the 6th South Carolina basically has two units, this one here and this one here, because it was broken up into two battalions. So the 6th Maine is fighting one, the other was harassing the 5th Wisconsin. So the AI has moved it now to support its regiments in the woods there. Here we go. So the 5th North Carolina picked off one of our artillerymen, but the ordnance rifles, the Battery E, 1st New York Artillery, just caused 19 casualties and a pretty good volley here that would have been much worse if not for the rain and the smoke. And that forced the North Carolina unit to retreat. We actually got them below their breaking strength and knocked enough morale off them that they're down to -1 morale. So they retreated, and I don't think they'll be coming back immediately. But we've still got 2 or 3 other Confederate regiments on that flank. But this is a very good sign for us. I think if we can break another Confederate regiment, we might actually get their morale down to breaking. So let's make an effort at that, actually. Let's take the 5th Wisconsin here. And the 4th South Carolina is in slightly rough shape. We think they're down to 2 morale. Out of their starting 4, they're down to 450 men. So let's get into their flank and see what we can do. And I'm actually going to use Urge unit there to get our men up a little bit. I will push the 6th Maine. Now here's something we've got. 654 men of the 6th Maine against about 200 of the South Carolina. As much as these previous charges haven't gone well for me, I'm going to go ahead and say must charge. Follow Zach Blood's advice and send the 6th Maine fixed bayonets into the 6th South Carolina. Try to break the 6th South Carolina. We'll do what we can to the 4th South Carolina. And I'm moving the 49th Pennsylvania. Oop, they misinterpreted the command. So they marched a little bit further north than I wanted them to. That's okay though, but they're now out of movement, so I can't change their formation again, so they're going to stay in column for one more turn. Meanwhile, I'll go up to the 7th Maine. They're back up to 2 morale. So you see when they rally, they don't quite go back up to maximum morale, but they're up to 2 out of 3, but they're down below their breaking strength, this particular unit. So even though they'll be able to fight again, they're still going to be fairly fragile. But our artillery did a good enough job there that I'm not too worried right now, unless both of those regiments come out at once and charge Battery E. That would be bad for us. But I'm hopeful that we can actually press our advantage and cause the Confederates some grief. So here we go. Ending turn. So the Confederate Division Commander D.H. Hill rallied one of their regiments that had broken. That's the message we just saw. And here we have the ordnance rifles now opening up on the Confederate unit out in the open. The 6th Maine just put a good volley into the 6th South Carolina, knocked them into negative morale. The 5th Wisconsin has brought the 4th South Carolina into negative morale again as well. I think this was a regiment that we had previously brought down to the breaking point and they rallied. However, they also did 21 casualties to us. They put a pretty good volley into us and knocked half a point of morale off the 5th Wisconsin. But maybe this will be enough. I'd say we've got them into negative morale again. If we break the 6th South Carolina with our charge from the Maine boys, then we might be able to do it. We might be able to push them over the edge. Oh! Did you see that? the 6th South Carolina avoided the charge. That can happen. So the battalion of the 6th South Carolina avoided the charge from the 6th Maine, so we didn't get to press the charge home. They retreated before it. But the 4th South Carolina was forced to retreat by another volley from the 5th Wisconsin. They've pushed them down to negative 3.7 morale now, so maybe that on its own might be enough. We've caused enough damage to that brigade. If that ends up causing enough damage to make that brigade waver, the whole force, there we go. The CSA is broken. The CSA's average morale has fallen to 1.4, and they are unable to continue fighting. So we could keep fighting now, or we could say I'm all done. For the purposes of this, I'm going to say I'm all done. And it's a USA victory! So I'll give you a quick look at just these screens here, and then I'll say thank you to all for watching. And I hope you all pick up Brother Against Brother tomorrow when it goes on sale in the Matrixgames store at matrixgames.com. Again, this has been Brother Against Brother, the Drawing of the Sword. And I'll just make one last note. Thanks again. At the end of the battle, when you exit that screen, you can also see all sides units without fog of war and take a look at everything that's happened. So again, thanks a lot, guys, and take care.